This was back in 2013, actually. I was at UGA, University of Georgia, in my sophomore year of college when I had heard a friend of my roommate own Bitcoin. I didn't know what it was. I invited him to come over, tell me about it. And once I learned about what Bitcoin was, I just became obsessed with researching it. And I thought it was such a revolutionary concept.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Stocktwits Executive Interview. I'm Katy Perry. We've got a great one for you today. You are going to hear from Brandon Mintz, founder, president, and CEO of Bitcoin Depot, a leading BTM operator operating the largest network of BTMs in North America. Brandon, thank you so much for stopping by. I have a lot of questions for you.
Thanks, Katie, for having me on.
So I'm reading up on you before the show. And before we get into the basics of the company, I'm reading that you founded this, or actually came up with your first crypto idea when you were in college. And I'm curious because that was, not that long ago, but several years ago. What was the initial thing that sort of, I guess, orange pilled you, so they say, at that time when it really wasn't as mainstream as it is now?
This was back in 2013, actually. I was at UGA, University of Georgia, in my sophomore year of college when I had heard a friend of my roommate own Bitcoin. I didn't know what it was, and I invited him to come over, tell me about it. And once I learned about what Bitcoin was, I just became obsessed with researching it. And I thought it was such a revolutionary concept. And I decided to go buy my first Bitcoin, ultimately trying online first with a popular exchange here in the US. And after 3 weeks, it still did not work, and I couldn't get any Bitcoin online. So I went back to this friend of a friend and I said, "Hey, where do I go? I'm having a lot of trouble online." And he said, "There's essentially one guy who sells Bitcoin for cash that I know of." And I decided to go that route. It seemed kind of strange, deposit cash into somebody's bank account and get Bitcoin 15 minutes later, but it worked. And I did get my Bitcoin 15 minutes later. And I was so excited about how I found this option that other people who wanted to buy Bitcoin didn't know about, to make it much easier for the average person. And at the time, this is when nobody even knew what Bitcoin was. So it was a pretty scary process.
Yeah, that's incredible story. I'm like, I want to know everything about that man and where he is now and what he's doing. Maybe a Netflix documentary in the works. But to what you're describing, even thinking about back then, what could have happened in terms of adoption if that friction wasn't there? Because it sounds like your buddy's friend in college was talking about it, telling people, and you had sort of the commitment to keep trying. And you wonder how many people sort of heard about it, were interested, and then hit that friction point and thought, I'll just wait.
Yeah, I'm sure 99% of people after that 3-week time frame where I spent dozens of hours trying to figure it out, and if they didn't get their Bitcoin after spending that much time, I doubt they would continue. But that's what ultimately led me to start this business, was finding that option that most people did not know was available and bringing it to a broader audience. And after I graduated in 2016, that led me to start Bitcoin Depot in Atlanta, Georgia, where I put out the company's first few machines around the city. And it just took off immediately. And it was really, really exciting to see the progress. And especially in a time where it was much more difficult to buy Bitcoin and the headlines just weren't very pretty, to be honest.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Personal anecdote, I bought my first Bitcoin out of an ATM. I think it was 2017, and I was in Helsinki for a tech conference. And I did it for like the experience of it. I wasn't like you. I wasn't as intellectually curious. I was like, well, yeah, I'll do it. And I didn't keep it, obviously. And I have a friend who also bought some at the time from the same ATM, and he likes to tease me about how I had paper hands. But what you're talking about is almost this next wave of mainstreamification, because, we're in financial circles, Bitcoin, we're like, oh yeah, it's totally mainstream. But really, if you zoom out, it's not yet. It's still early. So how is Bitcoin Depot making it even easier for everyday people who might not be in fintech or some of these circles to access this opportunity as they hear more and more about it in the news and the headlines?
Well, that's good news for your friend. Your friend is probably up about 100 times what was invested if it was early 2017 from that Bitcoin ATM. But you see what I mean? I mean, it's not only a novelty, there was an actual reason why you guys use a Bitcoin ATM at the time. I don't know if you and your friend had purchased your Bitcoin yet, but it's definitely an easier and more convenient and simple option than what exists out there today for a lot of people. Now, the average person that is very young, maybe more tech savvy, and be able to purchase Bitcoin online doesn't mean that they will. It just means maybe they have a little bit more ability, especially if they have a traditional bank account. But it still can be a drawn out and frustrating experience sometimes. However, it's a lot more convenient for some since you're already in your local neighborhood store, whether it's a grocery store, convenience store, etc. And it's right there on your way walking in or out of the store. On top of that, there's a lot of people in this country who are not very tech savvy. However, they've used other types of kiosks, whether it's at the airport paying for a bag or whether it's withdrawing cash from an ATM in a convenience store. They understand how a kiosk works and that it's a common tool to be able to complete a transaction. So this gives people a lot more familiarity and trust that this process is going to work since they've done it before for other types of transactions. So the people who are maybe not as tech savvy or prefer to use cash for a lot of transactions, the Bitcoin ATMs definitely appeal to them.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to think about like go-to-market strategy because to your point, if you think about pockets that are less tech savvy, you would assume they'd be outside of the major metropolitan areas, but those are the places that are more educated on crypto and Bitcoin. I'm curious how you think about just regionally, geographically, where your footprint is based on the insight of, hey, like this is great for underbanked people. This is great for people who maybe, wouldn't necessarily be able to navigate setting up a Coinbase or something else. How do you think about where to put these things?
Well, we're in really a wide array of demographics because of the customer segments that we have. So we're definitely in some of the highest income areas in the country. We're in middle class areas. We're in the lower income areas. We try to serve everyone that we can and give as many people access to buy Bitcoin as possible. But like you pointed out with the unbanked and underbanked population, this is still millions and millions of people in the US that either don't have banking access and they're unbanked, or maybe they have partial access and they're underbanked, maybe use Cash App or some sort of neobank option, and they still complete a large portion of their transactions, if not all of their transactions, in cash. And I'm not aware of online exchange options that allow you to pay in cash to purchase crypto. So for that population, we're really one of their only options. And being able to provide access to that population that is overlooked by many of these other crypto exchanges is very important. But part of the reason why we're in all these different types of income level areas and depending on banking access or not is we still have people who just want the convenience and they want the speed. So it's not all about cash transactions and underbanked and unbanked. We have plenty of customers that have bank accounts and don't do a ton of transactions in cash that may still go to a bank and withdraw money to purchase Bitcoin at our machines because they just see it's easier. Also, a lot of the online exchange options are flagged by banks, and those ACH debits and people trying to use their credit and debit cards from banks are still blocked to this day. So a lot of people may have banking access, but their bank is blocking the transactions and they can't purchase online.
Yeah, the kiosk does seem like the perfect vehicle for like a democratized asset type because it is like to your example, the airport. Doesn't matter if you're flying first class or you're on Spirit Airlines, like you're probably using the kiosk. And it's like sort of like this great equalizer where everyone uses them. It's familiar to everybody. Now let's talk about the scale of what you're building. It looks like you have about 9K total kiosks globally. Tell me a little bit about where those are located, and especially let's focus on what it looks like in the US.
So today we're actually over 9,000 kiosks globally. Very excited. We just crossed 9,000 since the end of Q2.
Okay.
In Australia, we recently launched in the past few months, and we shipped about 340 machines over there. And currently we have already over 200 installed.
Yeah.
Australia has been a growing market, and we're excited to potentially expand into 2 additional countries this year beyond Australia. We also have over 300 machines in Canada. So we're one of the top operators there. We're one of the top operators in Australia, and we have our eyes set globally in other continents besides where we are today. But in the US, we still have the large majority of our machines. We have over 8,500 today. We are the largest company in the world in the Bitcoin ATM space globally and also in the US. In the US, we're approaching 30% market share as we speak.
So 8,500 in the US. It's actually interesting, Brandon, when you were talking, I just did a quick search of how many Olive Gardens there are in the US, and there's 1,000. So you have 8 times as many. Your footprint's 8x that of Olive Garden. So that's a lot of kiosks. That's pretty good footprint.
It is. And it is kind of funny that you mentioned that, because as time has gone on and we say, hey, maybe there's other places where we can install our Bitcoin ATMs that we're not in today. Originally, we focused on gas stations and convenience stores. They've had long operating hours, easy parking. Someone can get in and out very quickly. However, Olive Garden may not be totally off the table, but I don't know how many locations Starbucks has, but hopefully at some point we pass them, as
Yeah.
I imagine it's probably more than us today.
Yeah. It is interesting to think about placing them near some place where people get a lot of cash tips. They could just immediately go trade those in. And I'm sure that that must be at least part of your segment of people who do get cash compensation and perhaps want to put it directly into something like Bitcoin.
Yeah, great example. That's definitely part of the use case. You already have cash. Why, even if you have a bank account, deposit it in the bank account and hope that the bank allows you to link your bank account with another online exchange or let you use your debit or credit card. It may not even work. And it's a multi-step process versus you already have cash. So you can probably go down the street, and if you're in a major city, you're likely within a mile of one of our machines. If you're in the metro area, and be in and out and have your Bitcoin on the way within a few minutes.
Yeah, I'm curious about how you think about revenue expansion. It's like similar to a franchise, not a franchise model, but a model where it's like it's scale, more kiosks, more locations. That's the way to do it. Or do you look at things like buying smaller players in the space, consolidating somehow to expand your footprint that way? How do you think new revenue will be unlocked? Is it just new kiosk, or is it new products within the kiosk? Tell us a little bit about that.
Great question. And I'm excited to say that our revenue has grown quite a lot this year. We just released our Q2 earnings report, and our revenue was up 6% year over year. So it's definitely from expansion of kiosks. And also, when we expand and place those kiosks in additional stores, the customer base grows over time. So it's not immediate. And we've deployed over 2,500 kiosks in about the past year and 8 months since the beginning of 2024. And so those kiosks will continue gaining a customer base for quite some time until they kind of hit a peak, if you will. So the new kiosks we deploy will continue to raise revenue, and all the existing kiosks that are younger and not fully mature yet will continue to raise revenue. Today, we still have 3,300 of our kiosks that are less than a year old. And typically in year 2 versus year 1, revenues can grow as much as 80% in year 2. So there's a lot of upside from our existing fleet today, just being so young, even if we didn't deploy an additional kiosk. Second, we're focused on international expansion. Like I mentioned earlier, we want to go into 2 additional countries. Today, about 90% of all Bitcoin ATMs are in the US, Canada, and Australia. So many of these other markets are very untapped. And it's very possible that we see greater revenues per machine internationally than we do in existing markets. The third thing is we're always trying to come up with new products that we could add to our machines or just the business in some way, shape, or form that'll be complementary. Not only do we have Bitcoin ATMs, but a couple years ago, we launched a product called BD Checkout that allows you to place an order on our app, which gives you a barcode to scan at the cash register at the checkout counter for dozens of different retailers and we have somewhere close to 10,000 locations there as well. So that's something we launched in the past couple of years, and there's definitely more up our sleeve in the years to come with additional products that could be useful to our customers, whether they're trying to buy or sell crypto or another consumer financial application that may be fitting for the type of customer base that we have.
Interesting. I want to talk a little bit about growing market share. You mentioned 30%. How do you think about differentiating? A kiosk is a kiosk at surface level. Would you say your primary competitors are other people trying to do similar things, but would you also say, do you see yourself competing with the exchanges themselves as well?
We think we really have a different customer base than the online exchanges for the reasons I previously mentioned. We accept cash, they don't. We have live customer support, and we answer typically within 15 to 20 seconds on the phone. You can text us, you can live chat us, you can email us, and it's a much more personalized touch than the online exchanges where it's very hard to even get an email address to receive support, let alone get someone on the phone. So for someone that likes to make a phone call and get support and not have to dig through an FAQ and try and find an email address and potentially wait days to get a response, we're definitely better for those reasons. And in many ways, we're quicker. And also, somebody doesn't have the risk of their bank account, debit card, credit card not working with the exchange because the bank is blocking the transactions. So those are just some of the reasons and why it's very useful for customers versus online exchanges, in addition to the kiosk familiarity and someone just liking that physical product to be able to use because they deem it as less risky.
Yeah, we can all relate to trying to get in touch with a fintech platform and getting sent to an FAQ and then talking to a robot for 5 minutes before realizing that is not a real person. So to that end, I think a lot of times we talk about regulation on our shows. We're talking about we're talking about tech regulation, fintech. This sounds a little different. I'm curious how the regulatory environment around this stuff is still so early in this country. If you watch any of the congressional hearings, you can't believe the questions that some of these elected officials are asking. How do they think about the ATM piece or the cash to Bitcoin piece in regulatory conversations that I guess from far away seem like they're mostly about sort of these tech companies?
Well, in the crypto space, there definitely is more regulation coming, and a lot of it is very positive to where everyone can have clarity. In our space as well, there is regulation that has already occurred and continuing to happen. And we view most of it as positive because it's all about consumer protection. While we have a nearly 200-person team and we have close to 50 people on customer support, we have close to 30 people on our compliance team that helps keep customers safe and avoid fraud and scams. Not everyone in our industry has that. There's still a lot of smaller players out there where it's only one person, or maybe one person and a couple of family members. And some of those people do not have the resources to keep up with these regulations. And so a lot of them are looking at exiting our industry. And you might have saw in June, we acquired a smaller operator who was kind of in the situation of lacking resources because it was just two guys running 40 machines, and we were able to acquire their assets and integrate those 40 machines into our network to provide a better customer experience, be able to use the resources we have to operate them efficiently. We think there's more opportunities out there, not only in the US, but internationally, for us to do the same thing. Just because of our scale with over 9,000 machines, with nearly 200-person team, being a public company and having a public currency to use to raise money for acquisitions, or to, if we want to use stock for acquisitions, we can do that as well. It's very unique in the Bitcoin ATM industry because we're the only company listed on the NASDAQ that's a Bitcoin ATM company. There's a couple other public Bitcoin ATM companies, but they have almost no trading volume and they're on much smaller exchanges. So we're in the best position in the industry to be able to execute on it and be able to operate most efficiently with any regulations that may come.
I'd never thought about that before, but it makes perfect sense that in the past era where it was a lot of don't do this, don't do that, and you don't really know what the rules are, it would almost be an advantage to not have a more compliant team or a more corporate sort of structure. And then in this new environment, though, where there's clear guardrails and more regulation, that would seem to favor a company with a 30-person compliance team. So an interesting shift that I don't think I've thought about it that way before.
Yeah, and we've seen this all throughout the crypto space. For example, I'm sure you've heard of the bit license, and only the biggest companies with the most funding were able to get the bit license early on, when there was kind of an open window to apply for it, 2015, and then it became, very, very difficult for everyone else after that.
Mm-hmm.
So this regulation is definitely favoring the largest and most compliant companies to not only survive but thrive, because their smaller competition will not have the resources, unfortunately. But that's just the way regulation goes in pretty much any industry.
Yep. I got one more for you, and it's a topic that has come up a bunch of times. And it's come up with companies that seemingly don't have anything to do with crypto, and that's adding Bitcoin to the company treasury. Talk to me about how you think about that at Bitcoin Depot, and how do you think that a strategy can benefit shareholders over time?
Yeah, Bitcoin treasuries have definitely been a popular topic over the past year or so as the price of Bitcoin has skyrocketed. There's a few different forms of it, of course. Some companies have no real operations, and their only goal is to accumulate as much Bitcoin as they possibly can. And if they're public, the ways they typically are doing that is by diluting shareholders and also acquiring a lot of debt to be able to accumulate that Bitcoin. So there's a lot of leverage at play, and that leverage creates risk for shareholders, especially if the price of Bitcoin drops and they have to sell off a large chunk of that Bitcoin to be able to pay down the debt that they may have. For us, so far, we have not acquired debt or necessarily been using funds from sales of stock at the market to fund our Bitcoin purchases. And the reason why is because we are very different from every other Bitcoin treasury company I've seen out there, since we have a operating business that has high revenues, high EBITDA, and very strong cash flow. For us, we've been able to use part of that cash flow to fund our Bitcoin purchases. And it's actually been a very small part of our cash flow to fund Bitcoin purchases. Had we used all of it, we would have a lot more Bitcoin today. But we have a few other things on our agenda and want to reserve cash for other projects in case we need it. But to date, we've really just bought Bitcoin opportunistically. Typically, we've been buying below $100,000. So right now, as of today, August 19th, we're up on our investment. And we have about 100 Bitcoin roughly today.
All right, great explainer of how that all works for people who are hearing a lot about this. Last question, where can people go to learn more about the company, the stock, but also maybe find a BTM in their area?
Great question. People can go to our website, bitcoindepot.com. We also have a crypto wallet app that supports many other cryptocurrencies besides Bitcoin, and also lists all of our locations where you can use either our BD checkout products or one of our 9,000 plus Bitcoin ATMs. So if you just search Bitcoin Depot in whatever app store you're using, you'll be able to find that. And last but not least, you can find our company on the NASDAQ by using ticker symbol BTM.
All right, Brandon Mintz, founder, president, and CEO of Bitcoin Depot. Thank you so much for stopping by. This is fascinating stuff, and you'll have to come by again when you have some more updates for us.
For sure. Thanks so much, Katie, for having me on.